I call it possessing a forensic faith. And I want to just describe for you what I mean, what it is to possess a forensic faith. Now, look, that word forensic is the word that's kind of seems like, it doesn't always seem like it fits with faith. I have a lot of people who are not, I was not a Christian myself till I was 35. Okay, so I grew up in an atheist home. I don't have any Christian family members. My dad is a very committed atheist. My son's a Christian, but my dad's still a very committed atheist. And I think when he would say forensic faith sounds like an oxymoron. These are two distinctly different things, but they really aren't. Forensic is an adjective that is grounded in the Latin root, which is forensis, which simply means, if you were to literally translate it, in open court or public. In other words, when we have a forensic approach to something, we are trying to make a case for this in a way that could be made publicly, evidentially, in front of a jury. So a forensic faith is really simply a faith in which the case for what you believe could be made publicly. So if you look at it this way, a forensic faith is a case-making faith. And what that means is that when someone asks you, hey, why is this true? You're going to be able to tell me why it's true evidentially. Look at it this way. There are several different ways to believe something in relationship to evidence. I'll put a diagram on this chalkboard for you here. Okay, so here's the diagram. Okay, one way related how that belief relates to evidence is simply to believe something in spite of evidence to the contrary. In spite of evidence to the contrary, you could believe something in spite of good reasons not to believe it. I would call this an unreasonable belief. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say, for example, you are committed to this belief that you get warts from touching frogs. Okay, that's something I grew up actually thinking was true, but as it turns out, you don't get warts from touching frogs. We have good evidence of how you get warts. You don't get it from touching frogs, okay? If you're going to continue to hold on to that belief, fine, but it's an unreasonable belief because we have good evidence to the contrary now. So if you believe that, you're believing that in spite of evidence to the contrary. There's another way to believe in something related to evidence, and that is to believe something without any evidence at all. To kind of believe it blindly. Look, I wasn't raised with my dad. He was more like an uncle. My parents divorced when I was 3. And my mom never remarried. But there was this guy named Jim Wallace who was in my life growing up, and he doesn't look that much like me. I think I look like my mom. But people told me he was my dad. And I believe he is my dad. But I've never done a paternity test to make sure. I mean, I could be wrong about this. I believe it, but I don't have any firm forensic evidence to suggest this is true. I could be right. He could be my dad. But I could be wrong because I've been believing this all this time without any scientific or any forensic evidence that would I could make a case publicly. Now, that's a good... Look, you could be in the right place if you hold one of these beliefs. This is believing without any evidence. This is a blind belief. You could be right in your blind belief, but you could also be wrong in your blind belief because you're believing something without any evidence to support your beliefs. There's a third way to believe something related to evidence, and that's to believe in something because of evidence. Because of the evidence. It leads you to this conclusion. That you believe something because I've got good reason to believe it. When we go into a criminal trial, right, I'm going to make a case in front of a jury that the guy sitting at the end of this table here, the defendant, is actually guilty of a murder. Well, I'm going to have to make a good case because I'm going to ask you to take a step across any doubts you might hold. Because remember, the standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. You're always going to have some open questions. We'll talk more about that in the next sessions. But the point is, you're going to have to take a choice, but your beliefs will be informed by the evidence that we showed you for weeks before we got to asking you for the verdict. Now, the same way these 3 versions of belief that I'm showing you right now on the chalkboard, this very easily could be transferred into how we have faith about things related to evidence. So, for example, you can have an unreasonable faith, a blind faith, or a forensic faith. Look, there's some people who have a faith in something in spite of evidence to the contrary. My dad remarried his second family. I have 6 half-brothers and sisters, all raised Mormon. Now, they believe something that I think is demonstrably false on the basis of evidence related to the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. But they still believe it. There are lots of people I know who are in the Christian church who might believe this is true but have no idea why it's true. And so they might say they have had some experience that has demonstrated for them that this is true, but everyone says that. You know that, right? My Mormon family also says they've had an experience that demonstrates that Mormonism is true. So your experience could be an evidence. I'm not saying it's not, but certainly it would have to be buttressed by other pieces of evidence to make sure that your experience has not misled you. So, of course, there's a forensic faith. Now I will ask you, look, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people who in the congregation, like this congregation I'm showing you here, who in the past, maybe in my dad's generation, he's not a believer, my grandparents, they weren't believers either. But let's just say, at some point several generations ago, it might have been good enough to say, hey, I believe this is true. For any number of experiential reasons, I believe this is true. Everyone in this congregation, as you can see, says they believe it's true. But if we're going to move from either an unreasonable faith or a blind faith to a forensic faith, we're going to have to be able to do better than this. We're going to have to be able to say, I can tell you why it's true. I can demonstrate for you why it's true.